met Jeff, but we're going to ask Jeff to share with you now about the research that he and his team have been doing in counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, but specifically for our group, his Secure Hotel Threat Portal. It's the world's largest, most sophisticated hotel threat database. Jeff's a former Pentagon planner, 9/11 survivor. He's the CEO of Muir Analytics. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Muir.
Thanks for having us, Stephen. We really appreciate the opportunity to come talk. All right. So let's go on to, let's see. At the bottom of each slide, by the way, there's going to be some kind of bottom line analysis. Please direct your eyes to that when and where necessary. And we've made these slides a little bit wordy, so you can take them home when they're eventually released and actually sit down and digest some of the data. And hopefully that will help you in your businesses with hotel threat mitigation, specifically regarding violence. Okay, so just a quick note about what we've got. We've got, as Stephen said, the world's largest and most sophisticated hotel violence database. I won't go into all the details on it, but I will say that we're very close to having 2,000 cases. We've got 1,950 plus cases at present. So it is a big database, and the results of it, the number crunching is quite powerful. So let's go to next slide. So in the past, we haven't released a whole lot of data because we're selling data, but because we have so many cases, we actually can reveal a lot of trends right now. And we'll also be providing some forecasting material at the end on the last slide. So hold on to your seats on that one. This particular slide, we're looking at hotel violence trends for the year 2017 in the United States. And you can see there on the graphic from January to the end of December, there were quite a few acts of hotel violence every single month. That would have been about 30 plus acts every single month. For the year 2017, because of the Mandalay Bay attacks, there were about 217 killed, which you could see is about an average of 18 a month, and around 1,102 wounded, which is an average about 91.8 a month. Without Mandalay Bay, those numbers would have been less, but they're still pretty bad. For other years, for 2018, for example, we've seen the number of acts of hotel violence in the United States go as high as 50 or 55, but typically it's hovering somewhere around the 30 or 40 mark. What are the reasons behind these acts of violence in the US? Well, a lot of it is drug related. Lots and lots of drug deals are going down inside hotels, ranging from 5 stars all the way down to 1 star or budget hotels, the independent hotels. Lots of human trafficking, lots of prostitution, and unfortunately, a lot of just aberrant, drunk and disorderly behavior, especially in the United States. But crime would be the #1 reason behind this, this violence. There's shootings, mostly physical assaults, and the physical assaults, we include strangulations, blunt force trauma, people hitting everybody else over the head with a hammer, fire extinguishers, all sorts of things like that, and lots of stabbings, unfortunately. Raids, typically that's when a group of people, they'll go raid a hotel, like the Mumbai raids in India from 2008, except for regarding a criminal stance in the United States. Typically, we're looking at a 2 or 3 man team coming in to rob a hotel, specifically the hotel cashier, the till, as the British would say, or the hotel safe, and occasionally a room as well. And we've got lots of arson attacks, multiple bombings, and lots of strikes, riots, and civil commotion, and other things. And again, all the top brands and independent brands, they've all been impacted. Let's go to the next slide, please. So that was a look at the United States from a statistical point of view, 2017. Now we're just going to look at 3 random acts of violence from the US that were pretty recent, 2021 specifically. On the far left-hand side of the screen, we've got a common situation, a common shooting. This one happened in Michigan, in the hotel parking lot. There was a shooting, it was a robbery, 1 person was killed. These are very common scenarios, And typically we see a lot of people dealing drugs out of hotel rooms, again, all the way from 5 stars, all the way down to 2, 3, 3, 2, and 1 star hotels. Typically we'll see a drug dealer shooting a buyer who is not cooperative, or a buyer who is trying to rip off the dealer. That's very common in the United States. Something that's not terribly common, but not uncommon, it's kind of in the center there, would be a shooting in this particular town, Green Bay, by the former food and beverage manager. He had an obsessive compulsive mental schism. He had a problem. He was obsessed with a female employee there, went to the hotel's restaurant looking for her. He got into an argument with some of the hotel's staff and ended up shooting 3 people, killing 2 staff and wounding 1. There was a massive panicked evacuation. And by the way, it was a gun-free zone. I realize there's a lot of controversy over firearms and the Second Amendment and whether we should or should not have firearms at all, or certain types of firearms. We're not going to debate any of that today. But what I can tell you for sure is the overwhelmingly vast majority of hotel shootings that happen in the US happen by former felons, convicted felons, who are not allowed to own or possess a firearm. So in many cases, if you had some kind of anti-firearm policy for your hotel, it's not going to stop most of these shootings, and we can prove that statistically. Something that's a bit uncommon would be the Las Vegas shooting here on the far right side of the screen. Not that hotel violence in Las Vegas is irregular, it's not. And not that shootings or stabbings in Vegas are irregular, they are not. But in this particular scenario, we had an individual who was a stalker. He was stalking his ex-girlfriend. He went to the Sahara, Las Vegas, to confront her. He was very angry with her because she broke up with him. And he pulled out a firearm and said that he was going to kill her and all of her girlfriends that were in the room partying with her at the time. He held his weapon out, pointed it at everybody in the room, grabbed her with his free hand and pulled her out in the hallway and started assaulting her. At that particular time, her girlfriends came out in the hallway and started beating him up. They took his firearm away from him, and one of the ladies shot him with it. And that particular end of that scenario is very uncommon. So the bottom line for all the US hotel violence would be, beyond a human tragedy, every casualty we see, and we saw them on the former slide, is a potential lawsuit, and we are tracking lawsuits, and there are a lot of them, an insurance payout, a revenue loss for the hotel, and what we call a brand burner, unfortunately. All right, so that's examples of US hotel violence. Let's go to the next slide. And we'll look at US hotel political violence. And by this, we mean things like strikes, riots, and civil commotion. So on the far left, we've got one case from 31 January 2021, where 45 people got organized, and they were armed, and they weren't armed with firearms, but they were armed with blunt instruments and some knives and some axes. This organization was called Oli Housing Now. It's a leftist group, and they're connected to a much more violent leftist group called AMAC. You can read about them right there. They're violent, anti-capitalist, anti-police, sort of like Antifa. They invaded this hotel and took it over in order to provide housing for the homeless in that particular town, Olympia. They intimidated the staff. They got into some physical scuffles with the staff, who then sheltered in place in a downstairs laundry room. They locked themselves in that laundry room and called the police. And the police had to stage a very methodical, not close quarters battle operation where they're going room to room shooting their firearms, but they did have to go room to room, floor by floor, and clear the place out of the occupiers. And on occasion, they would have to throw a flashbang grenade into a room to disorient the hotel attackers, the invaders, the raiders there, and dislodge them physically. It was a large operation. It was very difficult to carry out. And oh, by the way, there was a similar operation that was carried out earlier in January of 2021 in Fife, Washington, by a similar left-wing housing group. And again, they're taking over these hotels in order to provide room for the homeless in their particular towns. Then we're going to switch gears and go back to May 2020. During the George Floyd riots, there were lots of protests, and they were out there for good reason. And they were out there mostly protesting peacefully. But several of these protests, as the night went on in many cities around the United States, they turned violent. And in this particular case, there was violence perpetrated against the Hotel Bennett, which is an exclusive 5-star hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. And there was arson, not at the hotel, but there was arson all around Charleston. In this particular instance, looting, assaults, and property damage. Assaults and property damage did take place at the Bennett Hotel there in Charleston. 45 hospitality venues were struck in Charleston that evening. And then in other examples, in George Floyd related riots, all through that summer and spring, you can see a list of the hotels that were attacked there. And this is just a sample of the hotels. These are some of the more moneyed hotels that were attacked. And there was limited property damage for the most part. But once you smash out one of these giant floor to ceiling windows that faces a city street, that's anywhere between $15,000 to $30,000 per. So the money can add up. In one of the hotels, the protesters smashed in a window and flipped over a big giant grand piano. I think that was Chicago. And in the Hay Adams, they actually started a fire that almost got out of hand. And that would have been terrible because it's a small hotel, or at least the corridors are small, the rooms are smaller, and fire could spread very easily in situations like that. Luckily, the fire department came and put that out. So as political violence, and this is the bottom line, as political violence spills over from great big national issues in the United States, no matter what they are, we see them spilling over onto hotels. And the violence can obviously impact a hotel directly, but you can also have indirect violence impacts on hotels. So in several cities in the upper West Coast, we've seen these protest encampments, and these encampments have not negatively or violently impacted hotels directly by doing property damage. But because these encampments are around the hotels, they can't get any business. You can't come and go from the hotel safely, so they end up shutting down. So that's how the indirect impact of political violence can impact hotels. And obviously there is a loss of attraction there. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Recent international hotel violence. We've got Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Israel. So we'll start with Ethiopia. As Dale had talked about earlier, and as Stephen brought up, and as what I've just been talking about, strikes, riots, civil commotion all over the world because of economic issues, ethnic, tribal issues, political issues. It has reached a height. And again, it's not just in the US, it's global. So in Ethiopia in 2020, there was an Oromo. An Oromo is an ethnicity. An Oromo rights activist was assassinated, and the Oromo people amongst large swaths of Ethiopia rioted, killing over 200 people, injuring over 200. And several resorts and hotels were attacked, namely the Haley Resort series of hotels. And that's named after one of the long distance runners. I think he was a marathon runner, a very famous guy. He had a 3-star resort that was gutted by vandals, and I mean gutted. I've seen photographs of it. And then one of them was burnt to the ground, again, by vandals who set the place on fire. The end result, 400 employees out of work and $8 to $11 million in damages, ladies and gentlemen. So think of that kind of thing going haywire in the United States. The damages are going to be much, much higher, more people out of work. So take that into consideration as you digest this material, please. Mozambique. Basically, there is a large insurgent organization there that refers to itself as Al-Shabaab. It's not the Al-Shabaab of Somalia, but the State Department right now is calling this group ISIS Mozambique because they have aligned themselves with ISIS. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, of course, is aligned with Al-Qaeda, and they are at odds with each other. Actually, they're at each other's throats right now. In 9 September 2020, the ISIS Mozambique insurgents got into a bunch of boats, went from the mainland and attacked the And Beyond Vamizi exclusive eco resorts, about $1,000 plus a night to stay there. There were no casualties, thankfully, because COVID had shut that place down, but they burned the resort to the ground. Then later on, there was a much more harrowing attack, 24 March 2021. This organization, ISIS Mozambique, attacked a town called Palma. And as they were looting banks and grocery stores and killing civilians and whatnot, they came upon the Amarula Hotel. They laid siege to it. Some people managed to escape by helicopter. The management of the hotel escaped by helicopter, and everybody else was left behind. That particular episode left the hotel with a massive scandal. There were 2 convoys that tried to escape after about 2 days. 40 people were killed escaping, and about 12 people who stayed at the hotel were later executed, I'm sorry to say. And this was very recent, unfortunately. And then we look at the Jewish Muslim riots that happened in Acre, Israel. And Acre has a reputation of being one of the most wonderful places in Israel, because the Jewish and Muslim population there live copacetically. They get along, they help each other, they work at each other's businesses. They have a wonderful relationship there. But again, during a rocket attack and reprisal scenario between Israeli and Palestine forces, lots of people infiltrated into Acre, and provocateurs rioted and attacked scores of businesses, including 2 boutique hotels. The Effendi was burned severely with a Molotov cocktail. Several people were injured. 1 person was killed. And the other place, the Arabesque Arts and Residency Center, was attacked the first night of the riots, but the door was so thick, the attackers trying to get in couldn't quite knock that thing down. And the Muslim friends of the Jewish individual who ran the hotel came in to help him and chase those guys off. Well, the next night they came back, they worked on the door, unhinged the door, battered through it after about 15 minutes, and sacked the hotel, unfortunately. So let's go to the next slide. Right, international hotel violence. This is our forecast slide, excuse me. So on the left-hand side, we've got our forecast for the world regarding what is to come regarding hotel violence. And on the right side, we've got what is to come for the United States. We would caveat everything at the moment with, as COVID lifts, or if it lifts, we expect the hotel industry to start to rebound, as it has globally, right? But another onslaught of a different version of COVID could drive all that back. And if it does, the propensity for violence will be a little bit reduced, because there's fewer people staying in hotels, and terrorists and criminals like to have people staying in hotels so they can either, unfortunately, kill them or rob them. But here we have a whole set of criteria regarding why we estimate that international terrorism and political violence against hotels will increase. Number 1, post-Afghanistan. This might be what's referred to as the 4th global Islamist jihadist rally. And when we refer to Islamist jihadism, we're referring to individuals and groups with the ideology of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Although those groups don't align with each other, they fight each other, they both have the same philosophy regarding radical Islamist jihadist ideology. The first global Islamist jihadist rally came from the defeat of the Soviets in Afghanistan. That triggered a global jihad surge. 9/11, that would be the second one that caused a global jihadist surge. The third one would have been the establishment of ISIS and its caliphate in Iraq and Syria. And so we might be looking at a 4th Islamist jihadist global rally. And why is that important? Well, our statistics demonstrate that from 2010 to mid-2018, out of 389 terrorist attacks against hotels, 323 of them, 83%, were by Islamist jihadist groups or individuals. Please let that sink in, because again, we think we are facing another Islamist rally around the world. And so that has a lot of meaning there, those statistics. It's possible that some of the small arms, not the big Jeeps and the helicopters and all that kind of thing, but the pistols and the submachine guns and the carbines and the belt-fed machine guns might find their way from Afghanistan to Islamist jihadist and Al-Qaeda aligned groups. And if it does, that spells trouble for hotels globally. Number 5, the Al-Qaeda-ISIS rivalry has historically caused a lot of violence in Africa, for example, and it has caused hotel attacks in Africa. Why? Because ISIS and Al-Qaeda are both vying for, advertising for increased brand share, just like you would if you were a hotel company and you're trying to increase your brand share around the world. ISIS does not want to lose recruits and fighters to Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda doesn't want to lose recruits to ISIS. So they will go out and stage these heinous attacks and say, look how big and tough and bad we are. We're really hammering the infidels quite hard. And one of the ways they've done that, especially in Africa, is to attack hotels. So we could expect the same thing in the post-Afghanistan failure by the United States. Number 6, Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, ISIS has threatened Southeast Asia very recently, 30 August, 8 September, and 10 September again this year. And Islamist jihadists specifically have this rule that if they want to attack a civilian target, or any target for that matter, they have to issue a warning, and then their version of jurisprudence, their version of their own law, then allows them to go do that. Well, we have just seen that happen by ISIS for Southeast Asia. So if you're running hotels in Southeast Asia, you need to be on your P's and Q's. In Africa, and we have abbreviated all these different countries, we have seen massive amounts, a massive surge of Islamist jihadist activity all throughout Africa in these countries: Somalia, Tanzania, Kenya, the Democratic Republic of Congo. ISIS is there. NRA does not mean the National Rifle Association here. It means Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, and Burkina Faso, just to name a few. Number 8, in Europe, we've seen the same thing: France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Spain, etc. We've seen another surge of activity there. Lots of arrests being done of Islamist jihadist individuals and groups. That means the police and the intelligence agencies are definitely on their P's and Q's, but we can expect to see a bit more of a surge from these hostile groups in these countries and in other countries in Europe going forward. And again, the political friction will continue around the world. So you can expect more political strikes, riots, civil commotion, things like we described in Ethiopia for sure. On the right-hand side, US hotel violence will either remain the same or increase. Again, the caveat: as COVID lifts, or if it lifts, more hotels will have more business, more people will travel regarding business and for tourism. And that means certainly more targets for terrorists and for robbers as well, criminals. The Islamist jihadist threats that we've talked about are not just for Africa, Asia, and Europe. They are for the United States as well. We stand by that. We see also the propensity, certainly, for domestic terrorism from either or both the extreme left or right. Right now, there's a lot of hay being made about the extreme right, and we agree with that. Although in the United States, so far at least, we haven't seen any of these right-wing groups stage violent activities at hotels. It's been almost exclusively by the left. That does not mean that this afternoon some right-wing group will not attack a political rival or one of their quote-unquote political enemies at a hotel. I think that a scenario might be similar to what Stephen and his very excellent team came up with the COVID vaccination or the anti-vaxxers. If you have a left-leaning politician giving a talk at a hotel, and that person has drawn the ear of a right-wing group, we could definitely see right-wing violence against those individuals at a hotel like that. And it also, we can't forget that before 9/11, one of the largest, if not the largest, terrorist attacks in the history of this country was by Timothy McVeigh. Certainly, an anti-government individual where he brought almost the whole Muir federal building down with a big truck bomb. He and his crew, they actually sheared that building in half. So if history serves as a guide, you could see a right-wing group in the United States do that. Again, we haven't seen that against a hotel, but we think it's possible. Increased drug trafficking at the border because of our border chaos right now, whether you're for a wall or against a wall or whatever you're for or against. We're not deciding any of that here today, obviously, but because it is more open, there is much more drugs flowing across that border. Also, there is increased cartel versus cartel violence in Mexico, which means more drugs, again, coming across the border, including fentanyl, which is an incredibly dangerous component of lots of narcotics that are killing anywhere between 30 and 60,000 people in America every year. That drug violence spills over onto hotels. The more drugs you have in America, the more drug violence you have at hotels. And as a small caveat down here, we would see a little more, for these reasons, a little more drug violence in Mexico, specifically because of the cartel versus cartel violence. We recently saw a shooting at an exclusive restaurant in Tulum, Mexico, which is right next to a $1,000 a night property and a 2-star and a 3-star. And a few weeks back, there was also a jet ski raid. A cartel gunman got on jet skis. They rode up onto a beach in the western part of Cancun. They shot and killed the target of their assassination, but there were some ricocheted bullets that hit a woman who was just walking between a convenience store and a restaurant. She got hit in the shoulder. So we can expect a bit more of this kind of thing in Mexico, unfortunately. And ladies and gentlemen, I love Mexico. They have some of the best hotels and best concierge in the world. And so this is a bit heartbreaking for people who love Mexico, including me. Let's see, eased back policing or decreased policing in the United States. That's also problematic for hotels, especially regarding crime. And again, our political friction is continuing. It's not abating. That is also going to add to crime and political violence, especially at hotels in the United States. One more issue, if you look at the bottom line that we've got down here, more dead, more injured, physical damages globally in the United States, internationally for sure. Insurance is always going to be an issue. And in fact, one of the senior people at Hub about 2 years ago was talking about increased hotel premiums going from around 30 to 100% for all sorts of different types of hospitality insurance. Because of violence is increasing globally, we see that statistic definitely holding true. And we've also talked a whole lot with the London market and have discovered that lots of hoteliers are asking the London market and other insurers, other underwriters for all sorts of specialty coverage for violence. And that is also going to be a major trend going forward as well. So let's go to the final slide. Just some questions that we come up with here. So all of these scenarios you can look at, all of these statistics you can look at, and the forecasting you can look at and say, what do we do as a hotel company from a strategic perspective, from a physical security perspective, an insurance perspective? What do we do regarding architecture and, of course, a legal perspective? We believe that the best solutions for the hotel sector are going to be data or intelligence driven, and that is our space, because if you understand the threat, then you can manage and or mitigate that threat. And with that, I will turn it back over to Stephen, and if you've got questions, we'd be happy to entertain them.